Impact webinar. We'll be going through what's changed and what hasn't for Colorado. Before we do, though, just want to welcome everyone and also just do a quick sound, audio, visual check. Can you hear us? Can you see us? And can you see our screen? Give us a yes. Give us good morning. Let us know what part of Colorado you're in. All right. Good morning, James, Lisa, Jackson, Marcio. If I got that name right, my eyesight's not that good anymore. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you guys can hear us and see us. We will get the webinar kicked off. And please keep that chat box active. If you have questions or comments, put them in there throughout the webinar. We will be monitoring it, and we'll do our best to address it during the presentation or save it for a later part in the presentation. But we'll kick things off here. So my name is Chris Lopez. I'm one of the co-hosts of the webinar today, and I have Brandon Schulten here, who's going to present to us about the legislative impact, what changed, what didn't, and why it matters for landlords in 2026. Brandon, good morning, man.
Good morning. Excited to be here. And I've been knee deep in this stuff the last couple of days, prepping for this. So excited to share a few things.
Well, we appreciate your prep work. So Brandon is a friend of mine. He's an investor. He is the owner of Keyrenter Denver, which is a great property management and company here in Denver. And he's also very active in the legislation, staying up to speed because obviously it impacts, him as an investor and his business as well. So Brandon is going to share us the good news and the not so good news on today's webinar.
Yeah, I think there's more good news than we've had in the past on these. So excited to share that. Let's jump in. A little bit about me. I started Keyrenter in 2015. I was managing property a few years before that. We currently manage about 1,100 doors in the metro area, mostly single family homes, some small multifamily. And I've had a personal rental portfolio since 2012. So coming from that angle as well. And real quick here, I'm not an attorney. A lot of these things, we have to let the dust settle, but once they're signed and passed, then we kind of wait for attorneys to give their opinions on. Those are, not always consistent from one attorney to another. Then, even as it gets implemented and, it takes sometimes years to develop case law and stuff like that. So these things evolve, and I'm just sharing my perspective from my understanding as a property manager, looking these things over. So inevitably I'll get questions on this that I just do not feel like I have any business answering. So I'll do my best, but there may be some I don't know. All right, so just a quick overview of what we'll cover. I think we're really going to focus on a few bills that didn't pass this session because it's important to see what is it that people are trying to push forward. And they're always listening to where are they getting resistance, where are they hitting roadblocks. It kind of initially will look like a quieter year, but I certainly don't think that's the full story. High volume, as many as we've ever seen of housing, well, at least in the past 6 years, something like that, as many housing related bills as ever. Several proposals that would have been really significant in kind of, just the operational impact they would have had. A lot didn't pass, but some are still moving forward. So we'll take a look at those. I think one of my key takeaways this year is we've had a few years now of kind of these legislative coalition lobbying groups have come together and then kind of matured. And I think we're living in a world where there's effective kind of organization of the landlord voice more so than ever. So that's really great to see. So this is just a graph going back to 2020 of how many housing related bills have been proposed. So the top line is how many have been proposed. The bottom line is passed. So you can see it, trended up from 2020 to 2024, a little bit down last year, but we still had some pretty significant impact from what did pass. Back up in terms of what was introduced. As of now, I think there's just a couple of them that have actually been signed. So very low at this point, but that's kind of normal in the process. So we'll see where it lands on what actually gets passed. And then one thing I always want to just show here is this is not, the voodoo arts where there's nowhere to know, to go find out about this stuff, there's actually a very easy to use website that the Colorado General Assembly puts out here. So it's just this, leg.colorado.gov. So I'll try to go to just the home page here to show it at its most basic form. But you can go to bills, search bills, and then you can filter it just for this regular session that we're in right now. And then we'll go to just housing related. So that's where I'm pulling from. And you can see we've got 33 bills, and they're fairly easy to click into, and you can see where they're at in the process, who the sponsors are. There's a summary here that'll kind of give the key things, but then you can also read the bill in its entirety by clicking into these. So yeah, just know this is user friendly, and you're welcome to go check these out or wait for the webinars so that we explain it all. That's fine too. All right. So this is one that I wanted to highlight first. This was the most problematic that we saw come up this year. This did not pass. It definitely made its way out of committee. I don't know exactly where it was. It has to get voted on in both houses. There's amendments that happen and that kind of thing. But it was canceled. There was a public hearing maybe 3 weeks ago, something like that, 4 weeks ago. And there were a ton of people signed up to testify. And I think they just started to see there's a ton of opposition here. It was already kind of on the fringe if they had enough support for it. So one of the lobbying groups said they were able to get 3 no votes from Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee. So in general, these things that are kind of pro-tenant tend to fall on party lines, where usually most or all of the Democrats will be in favor of it and the Republicans will be opposed to it. It's not always that simple, but in the current makeup of the Congress in Colorado, there's a pretty big majority among the Democrats. And so oftentimes what's needed for these to not move forward is some opposition within the Democratic Party. So another big thing about this bill, let me talk about the actual bill really quick. So there was a few things in it that were just super problematic. So it limited the number of evictions that could be processed per day in each county. So they would have set a cap on it, which one of the groups behind this bill is a tenant advocacy attorney. So it seems very much written to their benefit, right? They're our firm can only represent so many tenants in a day, so let's just go ahead and statutorily limit how many can go through.
Was that really the I don't know, circular process?
I mean, I'm connecting dots that they didn't say publicly.
Right?
That's what
I've heard that in so many different ways. Interesting.
Yeah, totally. So, but the biggest thing here was it basically said no matter where you're at in the legal process of an eviction, if a tenant is in cases of hospitalization, sickness or injury, transportation issue, or complications related to electronic filing, we can just kind of stop the process. It'll vacate judgment. So even if it's gone all the way through judgment, it would rewind the whole process, give them a chance to file an answer. So even with vague language like that, it would there be real burden for them to prove that they were sick, or could that just be transportation issue? What does that even mean? So it just really, we saw that there would be a lot of ability for tenants to kind of delay processes, and the things could just get caught up and slowed down. And so it also give them a lot of leverage in settlements and that kind of thing of hey, I know I can take these actions and make this thing last another 90 days for you. So why don't you better pay me $5,000 just to move out or something. So anyway, a lot of problems with this one. So back to the process. One of the things is this came with a fiscal impact, because there was just some more procedural things. They could see that some cases would go through court, then it would be reset. It would have to go back through. So that's just more time in the, that it costs the state something to have courts open and running and that kind of thing. So as the budget has shaken out this year, there was a big deficit. that the state is facing. And so any bills that showed that they had like a negative fiscal impact started getting really scrutinized. So this was one of them. I mean, I hope nothing of this sort comes back next year, but you never know. And oftentimes we have seen things pass on a second or third attempt. But yeah, it was really encouraging how much opposition came together on this.
Do you think the 80 people in queue, do you think that was one of the things, they were looking out the window and be like, oh, damn, okay.
Yeah,
do you think
absolutely.
that's like part of the
I've heard people talk about this, like who are involved in the process of every legislature has their few things they want to get done. Every legislator has their few things they want to get done in the year. They have a maximum number of bills they can propose and that kind of thing. So, but if they put something out and they all of a sudden, when that one's going to the floor, it's like the room's packed and there's people to weigh in on it. And like, yeah, they open it up for testimony and there's a line out, or like, those are the signals to them that like, oh, wow, I really am rocking the boat with this thing. And they're always like trying to toe that line if they want to keep their support intact and not push too far and stuff. So I've heard like, it's just very meaningful if you get on the email lists of these groups, they'll tell you when to reach out and when it's worth sending an email and signing up for testimony. And so all of these things really do help. Yeah, just people like the legislators know what people have a problem with or where they're striking a chord. So. All right, this is another one, still in the process. So they titled this one Disabilities Housing Protections. So this is kind of an ongoing trend. I'm going to cover one bill later that is similar in spirit to this from last year, but essentially sometimes at the federal level, there's some like things are shifting, right? And so Colorado is sometimes reacting to that and saying like, hey, let's like create a law that kind of solidifies the language around the current state of affairs that we like, and that way this federal turmoil won't like override any of that. And so this one relates to like assistance animals, emotional support animals, and right now there's a lot of like ambiguity. There's been a couple court cases that have gotten a lot of publicity in my world, where someone like in one case, like a landlord said, I'm going to charge pet rent, even in the case of someone having a emotional support animal. And this went through court and I think it went to like an appeals court, and the landlord ended up winning. And I'm not going to do it justice here. There was a long process and that kind of thing. But basically, the understanding was I can still charge pet rent even though it's an emotional support animal. That's not putting an undue burden. I'm still making a reasonable accommodation, but I can still charge you pet rent unless you're able to prove that like it is an undue burden or something like that. Like if the tenant requested that and documented the way in which they couldn't afford this, then sure, we'll look at it. But other than that, we're going to charge pet rent. So that was just one of several things like this. And then you also started to see some of the HUD language shift. So where before there was some language about like what a reasonable accommodation is or how we're to view things like an emotional support animal, they've now like retracted statements or changed things in their language. And so, yeah, this is Colorado saying, hey, let's just solidify this to create clarity. Part of it, I thought this was a really interesting one. All right, this is 261045. So I wanted to show you this. Let's see if that works. This was one where the actual bill just gave very clear language on what they were trying to do with it. So here we go. Recent changes in federal policy have created uncertainty and increased the risk of litigation in this area. So really they're saying this is an effort to not clog up our courts with this and instead provide some clarity. So they say these changes include the rescission of federal guidance that previously assisted housing providers and individuals with disabilities in understanding their respective rights and obligations regarding assistance animals. So that's the intent of the bill, and essentially that's what it did. So this hasn't passed yet. It's moving through the process. I don't think it's one that housing providers are particularly up in arms about or really changes much. It'll feel like business as usual because we've been operating under a lot of these kind of guidelines and things in the past. So real quick, I just want to highlight for those of you who are not subscribed to our Denver Landlords Digest, we put out a lot of information on bills and that kind of thing throughout this process, as well as all sorts of things that help landlords be prepared day to day. So yeah, snap the QR code there and get signed up. That comes out every month. All right, so this was one, the first one we've seen that in some way is pro landlord that has actually passed and now been signed by the governor. So yeah, this is a win for our industry. Some of the like Cheddar Sulzer Muccio, is a big eviction law firm here, and they actually helped with some of the language in the writing of this bill. So this is one that really it's in response to a bill last year that was trying to limit landlords profiting from utilities and what's typically called RUBS, ratio utility billing system. And this has been something that landlords, especially in the multifamily space, have done for many, many years, where they're trying to allocate, like, what are the costs associated with running this? And then let's divide that up with the residents so that we advertise this rent, but then it comes with this charge every month. So now with the bill last year, they said you can't profit on these, but kind of what I think was an unintended consequence there is they basically in that first bill said, if you don't know the exact amount the tenant used of something, then you can't bill them for it. Well, what happened as this was rolled out is, like, a lot of these buildings have no mechanism for knowing exact usage tenant by tenant. So it's not about the landlord not profiting on it. It's just like there's actually no way to know how much water this unit used or how much electricity, because the meter is spread across them. So this was a way to say, let's clarify this previous bill. Let's bring back the ability for landlords to allocate shared utilities, even in the case where they don't know exact usage. And so yeah, it still kind of keeps in spirit what the bill from last year did. So it's saying you can't profit or have any kind of markup on utilities. Your methodology must be disclosed for calculating who owes what. The total of that cannot exceed what the actual bill was. And they just did not want this to be able to include common area costs. So, your electricity to run the lights outside the building or whatever could not be tucked into that. So fairly straightforward, but I think where we saw a ton of clients struggling through this as we were helping them was, like, in the, there might be a duplex that's got one electric meter, one water meter. And so, yeah, we were exploring, like, what does it cost to have someone come in and, install something that can kind of figure out exactly what's used unit by unit, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, this is restoring kind of an easy way where you're like, we can go by square footage, or, there's some different options there, and it doesn't have to be exact usage. So,
Brandon, did many of your clients end up moving forward with the sub metering?
I don't think a lot did. There was such a long period with the last one of like, nobody knew exactly how it was going to shake out. I don't think it was until, like, late in the year that the Attorney General maybe weighed in on it, so we had some sense of it. So I think there was just enough ambiguity that, like, and then we knew this was coming already and might be able to get through. So yeah, I don't think a ton of people move forward with that kind of thing, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I looked at it and just for the cost and everything, I was like, no,
yeah,
not, I'll either round it, or, I kind of heard from some people too that this language modified and clarified, which is great news. Nice to see them cleaning up, just an unintended consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I explored it on a building I own a unit in, and it was going to be like $9,000 or something to put this thing on it. And then there was a monthly subscription fee too, because you had to have some way that, like, somebody reads it and provides, like, the data and all that. So yeah, it just made no sense. All right, so this is another one that did not pass, but it's worth watching. So it was called Protections for Residential Tenants, HB 26-1047, and it just added requirements throughout the demand and eviction process. So like one of the first things is it said you had to include a lease and a copy of the ledger with any demands that were posted. I mean, nowadays with all the stuff that's come about lately, like leases are often dozens of pages. So yeah, just, I think like quickly they saw like that is not realistic if you're having to go print that all out and post it on the door every time. It also was really trying to protect tenants. So there was a lot of language in here about like redacting personal information from many eviction cases. I think in one case, like, or in that, the language was like, except for substantial violations, which is very small percentage of eviction cases. It also would require landlords to offer a payment method with no fee. So it couldn't be like, or online portal. So you had to give the tenants a way that they could pay rent that didn't involve anything electronic and had no fee attached to it. So I don't think this one would have been like, as certainly not as big of an operational impact as the previous one we looked at with the eviction cases and all that. But yeah, would have been, yeah, just would have added some headache for sure. So again, in this one, lobbying efforts secured sufficient opposition to kill the bill. A shout out to Pete Muccio. He testified before the House Judiciary Committee right before it was killed. So it seems like that was really effective. So, all right. Another one here that did not pass, but maybe worth keeping an eye on. So this was HB 26-1036, local taxes on vacant residential property. So this one came onto the scene pretty early on in the legislative process, caused a whole bunch of buzz. I think like in the idea behind this is, I think it's especially glaring in some of these like mountain luxury communities where you have houses up there that sit vacant all but 3 weeks a year or something like that, right? And then, but you also know there's a huge housing shortage for the workforce up there, and yeah, costs are exorbitant, and it causes all these problems in the community. So really, this was going to kind of empower local governments to have some tools at their disposal to put a tax on vacant property. And the idea was, okay, we're going to tax like these properties that are just, you know, sitting vacant, and then that money can go towards kind of solving the housing shortage there. I think the biggest problem here was there was just like, I think most of us could be like, yeah, I get the thing there, and it's a problem, and it's frustrating to see that. But actually trying to like create some kind of tax here and figure out what that would look like just had all kinds of unintended consequences. There was significant opposition from like landlords, property managers, real estate organizations, and just all these like edge cases of like, well, what if someone's just remodeling a home? Are they going to have to pay a tax then on it? Or yeah, what if you're trying to get something rented and it sits vacant for a bit, and who's going to monitor all this, and how to, you know, like quickly you're into, there's formulaic things and a bunch of forms and all this stuff. So they couldn't, the people backing this bill, which it was a number of sponsors that this bill had, they just kind of couldn't get a consensus on what the approach should be here. And yeah, so this bill died pretty early on, but yeah, something to keep an eye on. I don't think the overall concern is going away. And so maybe they'll spend their time in the, you know, off season trying to come up with a better way to approach this, or some way to solve this problem.
And you said most of the opposition, a lot of it's from like the mountain towns.
I think it was all over the place. I don't think the opposition was specifically from the mountain towns. I think the opposition was mostly from all the people who would be impacted by this, of okay, like, yeah, just real estate groups and anybody who owns property. Like there's just, they started to think like there's all kinds of reasons a property might be vacant, and it's not all, you know, just because some greedy landlord is unwilling to do their part or something. So yeah, I think several proposed bills face meaningful resistance as we talked through. So yeah, these things there's a lot of forces at play here. So yeah, just some thoughts here, but I think one of my takeaways here is like, I really want to encourage landlords to get involved. I've got a slide at the end. I think the Colorado Housing Coalition is probably just the most tailored to small landlords with one or a few properties. And they do, yeah, you can be a member for a small amount monthly and support the work they're doing. So, and it's nice to get on the radar of some of these groups too, because then we all live in different areas and have different people we can reach out to who are our direct representatives. And it helps. It makes an impact when we reach out. All right. So yeah, just a little summary here. There was kind of 4 areas we saw this stuff coming up. A lot again on the eviction and lease control side, but yeah, a lot of these things, the biggest impact for us is just operational complexity. It just adds layers to what you have to navigate, and you got to stop at every point and see if it fits these criteria and then take a different course of action and that kind of thing. So yeah, again, a really big win. I think we can all celebrate that this year has been very quiet in terms of how much complexity is added to the day-to-day for us. All right, so I wanted to go through a couple bills that are from past years. So if you guys have been paying attention, you've probably seen these, but then I wanted to highlight like a couple of case studies, because I think sometimes these bills, they come out and there's the initial, okay, we think this is what it means, but then there's like, it takes some time for us to see these things play out in real time. So I wanted to just highlight like some of how this has happened. So this was a really big one from last year, SB 25094. So this modified the warranty of habitability. It clarified what conditions count as a breach and established clearer procedures when tenants report unsafe or unhealthy housing conditions. And I really should have said, it didn't just clarify, but it expanded what conditions count as a breach. So it laid out these specific timelines and expectations for landlords to respond to and repair habitability issues. Broadened what counts as valid notice from a tenant to basically any way they might communicate with you. So yeah, this essentially I'll go into a few of the specifics here, but like it's requiring containment on a habitability issue to happen within 72 hours. Repairs of those issues must be completed within 7 days if they interfere with life, health, or safety. It's 14 days if it is on the 505 list, which I can show you really quick. I think we could probably just Google that and it'd be enough. Okay, so here, if the premise substantially lacks any of these things, waterproofing and weather protection of roof and exterior walls, plumbing or gas facilities that conform to applicable laws, running water and reasonable amounts of hot water at all times, things like that. So it created all these things that it's saying these need to be repaired in 14 days. And then if they can't be, then alternate housing must be provided. And this is where it got really tricky if it's saying the alternate housing has to match the number of bedrooms that are in the home. It has to have a range, stove, fridge, and freezer. The landlord also must pay a per diem for meals and incidentals for each tenant. And it even could trigger that, if it's a certain distance away, some kind of travel stipend has to be included and that kind of thing. So this just got really tricky, right? It used to be pretty easy if we had to put a tenant, well, the way that it used to work is we would just stop charging rent, right? Like, hey, the house isn't habitable right now, and so we're not going to charge rent until we can get this issue fixed. And the tenant, in theory, could take that money and go elsewhere and figure out what to do until it was ready for them to move back into. But this is saying we have to provide these alternate accommodations. So I'll just go back here. I'm going to walk through a case study where this came into play. So this is a property we manage on Layden Street. So on September 27th, mold was reported due to congestion, nose and throat irritation. There was no visual mold, but the tenant said, "Hey, I'm having these symptoms. I think it might be from mold." So we, contacted a company to test for it, coordinated that. It took until October 6th to get a report back. It did show elevated mold levels. And so the tenant was relocated. So we initially, how we've kind of come to handle this is we just go and say, "Hey, are you able to find something for $150 a day that's suitable for you?" So rather than us go try to secure some alternate housing, at least initially, we want to just work with the tenant, and they may have something that, like, we don't know where they work or where they want to be or what's important to them, so they could just take that budget and go elsewhere. In this case, they came back and said, "Well, we're struggling to find something for that amount, especially because we have pets. So could you increase it a little bit?" And we said, "Yeah, that's fine." So the mitigation of the mold was completed on October 19th. This also is part of this bill. It's like there was some real strict rules about like containing mold and how all that worked. So there's a 24-hour period that starts once you've removed all like machines from the home or something like that, then you can test. So we tested on October 20th. In this case, the landlord's paying every day that the tenant's at an alternate place. So we expedited the results, paid for that to be sped up, got those back, and then the tenant was approved to move back in. So yeah, that was just a very different process than how this would have looked in the past with some of these things, but this is how this one shook out.
So Brandon, with that that bill, it sounded like it clarified a lot of things, right? Was a main goal of it. Did that make your life easier as a property manager because things were clarified and less ambiguous, or is it the opposite?
No,
where, hey,
I would say
so much extra stuff, it was paying the
that's
butt.
a good question. I can see what you mean. I think the better word is it grossly expanded what qualified as these things, right? So it actually made it a lot trickier. And the bill, in its effort to be clear, it just created some things that it's like aren't necessarily how things usually work, right? And I didn't even get into it, but there's things about it needs to be within 5 miles of the home, and then if nothing can be secured there, then it can go to 10 miles. We had one recently that was really kind of interesting where we had a habitability issue, and the tenant just decided to go to Texas during the time or whatever. And so they sent us a bill for their gas to get there, and then a hotel or wherever they were staying there. And we talked to our attorney about it, and they were like, how this bill is written, I really don't think you paying for a hotel in Texas like qualifies as you doing your part for what this says you need to do. So we're like, well, what are we supposed to do? Just decline that? But and they were like, you could reserve a hotel here for them and say, hey, this is your option, which you can see would not have gone over well with the tenant. So there's just things like that where this, in an effort to be more clear, I think it actually just created a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And just things where it's like, it's not the ideal outcome for any party to have to go through some of this. So, it's tricky. All right, let's look at another one from last year. So this is House Bill 25-1240, protections for tenants with housing subsidies. So this modified the protections for tenants using housing subsidies, including extending eviction timelines and protections for properties with federally backed mortgages. So remember we had the other one that we talked about where there was some, we were having these court cases and stuff in other states. And so Colorado was trying to solidify some of the stuff around assistance animals. Very much this is was in that same vein from last year. Right before this, we'd had this big question mark of, is the CARES Act still in effect? And are these 30-day timelines still required for when you post a notice on a property that's covered by the CARES Act, which means federally backed mortgage or subsidy? Then yeah, it's 30 days, not 10 days as it was from Colorado law before. So that was like, that went all the way to the Colorado Supreme Court, was a big deal. But then they came in and just said, no, we just want this for all of Colorado. And so they just kind of brought this language into our laws and created some clarity. So this is one, Chris, where maybe I'd say, yeah, at least it's clear now, because before you're like, how aggressive do we want to be with this thing? And, you know, like how many landlords want to end up fighting something in court? So at least we know, but yeah, not ideal to have to do 30-day notices on these. So, but essentially, yeah, like now we have a set of different demands, and you have to kind of figure out if you have a federally backed mortgage or subsidy, and then the 30-day period kicks in there. And I think this is just whoever you use for your as an eviction attorney, this is all kind of baked in now of like when you go to get a form from them, you know, you'll have some way to figure out which one applies to you and that kind of thing. All right, so let's look at House Bill 251168. It's another one from last year. This is the domestic violence bill. And this essentially expands the process for tenants to terminate leases due to domestic violence. It also introduced this structured repayment plan. So in the past, if we had reported domestic violence, we would immediately say, okay, you need to provide a police report. If they didn't have it, then essentially it's like, well, that's what's required for us to like do anything with domestic violence. Like, and in the past, it was just, we needed to let a party out of the lease who's been a victim of domestic violence. This expanded what it could be to report domestic violence. So now they could obtain verification from a qualified third party. And so that was medical professional, domestic violence advocate, clergy, law enforcement. But then there was also this provision of like, or they could actually submit a self-attestation. So then they don't even need that. And then once they do that, it triggers these rights. But the one thing that came with that is like landlords, if there's something owing at the time of reporting this, then a repayment plan must be offered to them. And this repayment plan must be in writing. It must require minimum monthly payments of at least $25 and conclude within 9 months. So as I understand this, it doesn't mean we have to say, okay, you can stop paying rent going forward and you only have to pay $25. It just reflects what's owing at the time that they report the domestic violence. So it could be a way that they spread out, you know, some amount owing like that. We really haven't run into that as much. Like this was one that overall my industry was really worried about people taking advantage of and just using it as this Hail Mary. Oh, well, I was a domestic violence victim, and so I don't need to pay this. We've not seen abuse of that from tenants, thankfully.
That's really good to hear.
Yeah, but it has changed how we have to navigate domestic violence cases. So this is one that we came across recently. So there was a husband and wife. Within a couple of days of each other, they both reported domestic violence to us. Both had police reports. Both had legal representation. So this escalated pretty quickly. Both husband and wife wanted to stay in the property. So that was initially like the tricky part of we were trying to, you know, get with our attorney of like, what are we supposed to do when they both have a legitimate claim and they're both wanting to stay in the house and for the other one to leave. Thankfully, before like the dust fully settled and we had to make a decision on that, they just both changed their tone and said, no, we want out. So yeah, with legitimate claims from both parties, there was no clear like aggressor and victim. We had to just release both parties from the lease, and we couldn't charge them any penalties or fees for like breaking the lease early or any rent after they moved out, that kind of thing.
Did you recover the rent up to their move out date?
Yeah, these were professional people, so that it wasn't one where they were in arrears on any payments or anything like that. So.
Okay.
yeah, but it was kind of a unique one for us. And yeah, these are the type of things now that we involve our attorney in a lot more of this kind of thing. All right, so this was another one from last year, HB 25-1090, protections against deceptive pricing practices. So this was a tricky one. There was this long period leading up to when this officially went live. So like the bill was signed in June or something like that, but it went live in January of 2026. And it requires that landlords disclose all mandatory fees in advertisements. So this was not even a housing bill. It was actually under commerce, I think. And yeah, this is one that it's like, we all see this in other areas too, right? When you buy tickets now, that immediately you're seeing the full price of the ticket right there. It's not like you see one price and you start clicking through and all of a sudden it's 30% more when you go to check out. So they're trying to kind of expand that same type of thing. Let's just create a lot of transparency here across landlords. So the tricky part is that, like, in practice, we know that we as landlords advertise monthly rent in a listing or whatever, but this bill wasn't written with that in mind. It doesn't really address that. It's kind of saying you need to disclose everything that someone would pay in a contract. But yeah, that's just, again, not how our industry works. Like, we don't, it doesn't say, oh, to rent this house, it's $20,000 for the full year. So you're kind of having to like adapt that was a little bit of the tricky part of this as attorneys are navigating this and creating recommendations. Yeah, there's some ambiguous language there, but essentially they're like, we need to stop with anything that you're like adding on some estimated fee or there's something like that. You can still have the tenants paying their own utilities. And we now know that's like regulated with some of those other bills. You can't be making money there, but it's okay if they're paying utilities separate, but you need to include a price that includes everything they'll pay on a monthly basis outside of that. So they're saying failure to disclose fees is a deceptive trade practice, and it adds marketing compliance obligations. So I'll show you, we're still in this period of not everybody kind of getting on board in the same way here. So Zillow is, the number one place people go to search for rentals. If we just go to an area here, we'll look at some of these listings. So this is an example where they have not kind of complied with this in the way that Zillow lays it out. And so you just see fees may apply. So some listings you'll see pop up that way. And then some, oh, perfect. Got one example of each in 2 tries. So this one has this blue check mark, total monthly price. So we know they are including everything that'll be owing on a monthly basis there. So when I was most recently, when I've clicked around, it seems maybe 50-50, maybe a little bit more of people getting this total monthly price, but we're still kind of in this period where not everybody's advertising the same way. Hopefully this will all kind of shake out over time and everybody will be doing it the same way. And we know we're always like, I think that's ultimately what we want, is just to have the tenants know that it's apples to apples when they're looking around, right? And they're not like, oh, like I'm comparing this 2,400 rental to this 2,600, not knowing that this one's actually 2,750 when you get all said and done with the extra fees added on and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a little bit like, the bill seems pretty straightforward. We've had to get on board and adopt it, but it's this frustrating time of sometimes you feel like you're not on an even playing field with people not complying with this yet.
Have you found it to be very burdensome to update it within to reflect the prices accurately? And have you seen any decrease in interest to that potential, like, apple versus orange comparison?
Yeah, good question. I think we've been in a slower rental market than we've seen in a number of years, right? Big picture. But when this took effect in January 1, we've actually had a good spring so far compared to what it was like in the fall. And that's kind of adjusted for normal seasonal swings and that kind of thing. We've seen good demand. So I don't think we've felt this anecdotally, at least, it doesn't feel like, oh, all of a sudden demand dropped off, which I did hear in tickets. I heard people who, I have like a buddy who has some season tickets and he sells a lot of them. And he said immediately he saw a decrease in what people would pay when they switched over to the new format with that. I don't think in our case we're seeing that.
And hasn't been, second part, has it been very burdensome for you to update your listing profile?
Not at all. No, it's very simple. Someone asked about pet fees. So yeah, pet fees, you don't have to. It's specifically, I think the language says like required fees or something like that. So if it's something that you still need to disclose that there could be possible pet fees, but that wouldn't be included in that total monthly price number. Okay, and then we have another question. Your townhouse, you charge $2,700, which includes trash, HOA, and sewer. And then the tenant pays their own Excel and water. So yeah, like in the past, you maybe would have advertised that as $2,500, and then you could tack on like a $200 fee that covers trash, HOA, and sewer that wouldn't show in that price, and then they'd still pay their own utilities. So what you're saying here would be totally, I think, compliant as I understand it. $2,700, and it includes everything that they have to pay. There's no option, and it's not like for actual usage adjusted each month. Someone asked Benson, how are you able to get the blue check mark on Zillow? I don't know. I don't know that I can. I thought it was pretty straightforward that you can just enter it in the way that they want and they'll give you that, but I don't know the actual mechanics. I don't deal with that. Yeah, so David's asking, you have a base rent of $1,645 with a flat $190 monthly utility fee. And I think, yeah, you're unfortunately in that thing of like that. You are complying with the law to just do it at $1,835 and disclose that total fee. But it is frustrating right now when their tenants are comparing that to another unit where utilities are split out and paid individually. So maybe it would make sense for you to try to get them to pay utilities in some way. And then you don't have to include that in the, like paying direct, either direct to the utility company, or it could still be billed through you. But if you have a way to pass that bill on each month and add it to the rent that they're owing, then I think you'd be okay to advertise the lower amount. All right. I'll go over this one other one. This is HB 25-1249. I think this is the last one we've gotten here. So this tightens regulations around how landlords collect, return, and document security deposits. This is one, when we read it, we were like, some of it you're just surprised. Like we already thought that was a requirement. And so it didn't really seem new, but it did. This is maybe one, Chris, where the clarity was helpful. At least now we know there's some actual like language about it, and we're not just like relying on some mix of, you know, HUD guidelines that aren't official, that kind of thing. So it defines normal wear and tear further than it was defined before. It restricts deductions for cleaning. So there's some language that if the unit is substantially less clean than when they moved in, but it's like, for us, it meant you have to make some allowance for having to do a little bit of cleaning that you can't bill back to the tenant. Again, unless it's like filthy and kind of trashed. It put a 10-year useful life on carpet. So if it's older than 10 years, you can't charge to replace carpet. Same thing on the paint. And then it also just said landlords need to provide an itemized deductions with supporting receipts. Again, that's been best practice for a long time. And if you've ever gone to court on it, you certainly know you've got to have that kind of thing. Full financial statements if deposits are withheld. Again, I think most of us have been doing that. It also added this language that it requires a walkthrough upon request. So this is kind of a tricky one. Again, just seemed like an operational burden if tenants were going to be saying, hey, you need to walk through the property, or I want to walk through the property with you before, you know, after my lease is up or whatever. So the language on this, I think, was written in a way that it hasn't had a huge impact. So the tenant has to be fully moved out of the property before the lease is over. So the walkthrough would happen then, right? It just says, I can't remember how exactly it's written, but how our kind of attorney advised on it, like basically you couldn't have a policy where you just say, no, we don't do that, right? You have to be willing to do it if they ask. But if you can't get the scheduling pinned down on it or something like that, there's no like, you're not in violation if it doesn't happen. It's just you have to not have a policy that you refuse to do it. So it also doesn't say if you walk through a property with a tenant that you're like, everything said is the final say on, what damage you're going to withhold from or that kind of thing. So yeah, we've not in practice had many requests for this. And so, yeah, hasn't changed much on our end. But again, if somebody asks, make sure you're not just flat out saying you don't do that, because then you could get in some hot water here. So yeah, what we're kind of getting from all this, direction of policy is clear. I think that is obvious to all of us who've been at this for a while. It was a much different environment 6-7 years ago.
I would agree with that crystal ball read there, Brandon.
Yeah, right. That's my best insight of the day, right? So we're continuing to have this focus on tenant protections, increased regulation. But I think it feels like lately there's at least a little more, stuff's making a little more sense. There's stuff's getting shot down that really feels problematic and one-sided. It seems like the policymakers are listening a little bit more. And again, maybe that's a reflection of just the organization against this stuff is more mature and doing a better job and knows where to push and that kind of thing. So yeah, certainly would encourage you to get involved. Every little bit helps. So I want to go to this slide and just give a shout out to the Colorado Housing Coalition. Again, you can get involved for, I think they have an option for like $25 a month or something. I think it's really good to be in support of these kind of things, and they're doing good work. And specifically, like, there's some other groups, but if you own just a couple rentals, this is the group that's going to advocate for you. I think everything else is going to be geared a little bit more towards, at least it's including people with big apartment buildings and stuff like that. And sometimes those interests are just varied, right? And there's issues that are a big deal to them that really have no impact on you and vice versa. So the CHC is made up of basically single family housing providers. So great group. All right, so last, just to say we're always happy to talk to anyone who's in need of property management. We charge 7.5% to 9% for our monthly management, depending on how many properties you have, and half a month's rent to place a tenant. So feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, if there's any questions I didn't get to, I was kind of loosely following this.
Well, yeah, I know you were doing a good job following that too, and then also John from the Keyrenter team, he was in there too, answering a lot of questions. So big shout out to John for being in there. So thank you, Brandon. This was a great overview. I'm looking at questions now. I think they all got answered, but I mean, I appreciate you taking the time to present all this, because I know it's a lot of work, to be able to speak on it. But yeah, we really appreciate it. So very good updates, and it's good to see that maybe the pendulum has kind of lost momentum in the other direction, and hopefully swinging back more towards a little more balanced position on there. But I am optimistic on the one thing that was very, I think this is cool from our perspective, and just a civic responsibility said, hey, those 80 people showed up for the hearing, and that probably helped to mute, or help kill that bill. Like, that's cool to see when people get involved, that sometimes government does listen to us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There are, these people want to get reelected. And so if they know that what they're doing doesn't represent the desires of their voting bloc, then they'll change their mind on things. So, yeah. A couple of questions I saw in here. Shanna was hoping for a quick recap of laws from the past couple of years. So we certainly have, we've done that. So make sure you reach out to me, shoot me an email, and we'll get you a recording of another call that was a bigger overview of from past years. Sharon asks if we provide property management on an as-needed basis. I think it'd be best just reach out. We could talk about what specifically you mean there, and if we could help. And then there was one about Ken says you have a medium-term rental and charge a cleaning fee of $250 when they move out. My understanding is some of these laws have had carve-outs for like shorter-term leases and that kind of thing. I don't believe that one does. So I think that could be a possible violation if you're just doing a flat fee. And even if, I know it seems straightforward, you're like, they signed the contract, they agreed to it. But yeah, a lot of these things do override what you'd put in there. So yeah, you're probably in violation. Whether or not you'd ever get in trouble for it, you might be fine to do that for years and never hear anything else. But I think as I read it, that wouldn't be allowed. All right. Should we wrap it up there, Chris?
I think so. I was just going through the questions, and I know Shayna had asked about those other laws. John offered if you email Keyrenter, they can give you a list of some laws, and we've also done some webinars and podcasts to recaps of the last couple of years as well. So thank you, John, for getting that email out there. Brandon, awesome job. Thank you so much for all the prep work and presenting today. So greatly appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Chris. And thanks for everybody who showed up.
Yeah. And of course, if you guys have any questions, reach out to Keyrenter. They have limited, knowledge they can do for you. But if you want them to use them potentially as a property manager, I would put them on your list to call. I referred many people over to them, and I've all heard good things so far. So if you're tired of navigating these laws yourself, I can definitely put in a good word for calling John, Brandon, the rest of the team over there at Keyrenter. So big thank you to you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.